sorry for delay. In the next room we have had some room automation problems. I think it was the same like here. But yeah, we have to live with our room automation server is in maintenance mode. That's not good. Okay, but we will check it. So let's welcome Andre Fischer to his track about the cloud, what do we have? I'm sorry. SAP Cloud Platform, ABAP environment, and the RESTful ABAP Programming Model. Okay, thank you, and it's your stage.
Yeah. Yes. So you heard it already. It's the official product name is the SAP Cloud Platform ABAP environment. So maybe easier, it's ABAP in the cloud. Also, our internal name is Steampunk, which is even nicer. And what you use there is then, if it comes to ABAP programming, our new ABAP RESTful Programming Model. Let's start with an overview. What the SAP Cloud Platform is about. So basically, why did we do that? So why have we started to put ABAP into the cloud? So we have lots of customers like you here, so that have ABAP, and when talking about SAP Cloud Platform in the past, I was frequently asked, hey, why can't we do ABAP programming in the cloud? So what's so special then on SAP Cloud Platform? If you can do Java and JavaScript, you can do it elsewhere. But why can't we do ABAP? Yeah, it took a while, but last year in August, that was the release of the first version of our ABAP in the cloud. So we know that ABAP is enterprise ready, so we use it in lots of installations, and therefore it's also very good. Underneath there is, let's say, more or less a classic ABAP, but a streamlined ABAP, so it's stable. You know, you can count on that this will work. And on the other hand, we have SAP S/4HANA Cloud. So that's our delivery for S/4HANA in the cloud. But there is one, let's say, drawback for ABAP developers. You cannot do real, in quotes, ABAP development in SAP S/4HANA Cloud. So you can do some, let's say, reporting. You can do key user tools, and you can use key user tools to add fields to a UI, which is great. And you can also use it for an S/4HANA on-prem, and I would really advise to do so. But due to stability, we cannot allow customers to develop in that stack, because that would not work. So the idea is to offer some ways to do ABAP programming more or less side by side. So we put an ABAP box side by side into the cloud, and if customers want to do more complex implementations for S/4HANA Cloud, they can do so with ABAP in the cloud itself. But it can also be used to do side-by-side extensions for an S/4HANA on-prem or even an ERP on-prem system, because it's possible to talk to on-premise systems via OData and RFC. So if you use this ABAP stack, which is running in the cloud, you will always have the newest version of the ABAP platform. Right now, as of May 11, we have the version 19.05 out. And you will also have always the newest version of HANA. And also the newest version of the SAP Cloud Platform services that are around in the SAP Cloud Platform. That also means for our development, that's quite a challenge. So we have to make sure when developing new stuff or putting new stuff into this ABAP stack that all your implementations that are out there do not break, because the systems will be upgraded automatically. Every 3 months there is an upgrade in the stack. So next will be 1908. And also we have on a 2-weekly basis we have hot fixes, so we can fix stuff very quickly if something might not work as expected. But we have to make sure, as I said, that nothing breaks if you have an implementation based on this, and this is quite a challenge. So the idea is, as I said, is to offer a way to do decoupled development with ABAP side by side with your known ABAP skills, so that you as an ABAP developer are also able to do ABAP development in the cloud. If you're a customer that has maybe a bunch of Java developers there, okay, they can maybe decide, okay, we are doing an extension in SAP Cloud using Java or even JavaScript. That's fine, but one big difference usually is also that the ABAP developer has lots of business logic, business know-how, so he knows what is behind this. So we heard this talk from this young guy that started to learn ABAP and was confronted with ABAP code that was even older than himself and still running. And yeah, so this is what we want to achieve there. Looking at this now, this is a view on the ABAP stack. So it's running in the ABAP Cloud Platform and there in the Cloud Foundry environment. So we have here then this box, this ABAP Platform as a service. And with this you can build HTTP or data services based on this RESTful ABAP programming model, which technically is based on core data services. So from here we use underneath an SAP HANA instance, and the whole stuff is managed via the SAP Cloud Platform cockpit. We will have a short view in this later. And one thing which is different compared to on-prem ABAP, the development. So you do that via ABAP in Eclipse, or better to say you have to do this. There is no way to do any development using good old SE24 or SE80, SE11. And the main reason is because there is no sub-GUI access to ABAP in the cloud. So if you have not already started to do ABAP development with ABAP in Eclipse, it's good. It's a good point in time now to start with that. What else? So as I said, we can tap into backend systems because this is more or less an empty ABAP box. So there is no, let's say, there are no tables like Mara and whatever in it. So you can think of it a little bit like a NetWeaver server which is standing side by side to your ERP in your data center. So, as I said, the programming model is new, or we are now delivering this latest version of the ABAP programming model with ABAP in the cloud. This is something which is not yet out on premise, but which will be delivered, which we plan to deliver first with 1909. With the next version of S/4HANA, there will be a first delivery of this new programming model also on premises. So looking at this, so the main development here takes place in developing core data services, and you will do ABAP development where you are going to implement business logic in ABAP, and they're implementing business objects later on. So the gateway framework is still there. So what you know like SAP Gateway, which you know maybe from your on-premise installation. So the framework is still there, but you're not going to implement those APIs that you're maybe used to, like get entity set and get entity and stuff like that. This is not going to be implemented. Rather, your code-based implementation will be agnostic from the protocol being used. So the evolution is there. So we start the first version of that was from the Fiori programming model is in 740. There you can start with developing CDS views. And with 750, we added even more capabilities there. So you can use core data services for read access, but still have to use classic APIs for write access. Then in 751 with S4HANA, you can use the BOPF objects and core data services. So here the development is moving from implementing OData APIs to implementing business logic in BOPF objects. And the RESTful programming model, so the first version came out with ABAP in the cloud, is also using core data services and new types of repository objects like service definition, service binding, and I will show right now what this is about. We plan to have an integration, so if you're right now on S4HANA, so you can still use we still recommend to use BOPF-based programming there, so if you use that, and we plan to offer an integration there so that you can reuse what you did there also in then later newer releases. And if you come from older, in quotes, platforms, it's a good idea to carve out your CRUD queue business logic into separate classes so that it will be easier to reuse this in so-called unmanaged implementations where the ABAP developer takes care of the whole business logic rather to so-called managed implementations. You saw this earlier from the CAP programming model where the create, update, delete access is managed is also generated. So here's this big picture, what we have what's new. So the CDS views are still there, but now we come into new objects like service binding, service definition, and stuff like that. And maybe switch now to ABAP in Eclipse. So here we see, oops, I have to switch. One moment, I have to switch here to duplicate. Okay. Now we are in ABAP in Eclipse, so I'm connected here to a system in the cloud, and this is a project where we have a simple data definition, a CDS view. And what is new now in the programming model is that we have a keyword called root. So there is always a root object in a business object, so the CDS view on the highest level. And from there you can have associations to, for example, here existing CDS views that are standard CDS views, but you could also define associations to other CDS views that you have created yourself. Currently, we have to put here everything, also the annotations, UI-based annotations, into one DDL source code. So there is not yet a support for metadata extensions as you find it in on-premise. And we see here a basic implementation. This is reading data from database tables. So I've created here a Z table that is reading data, and if we want to develop as I said, the whole thing starts with a CDS-based data model. We just have seen this CDS view. And now the first step would be to add a behavior to such a CDS view. And what is a behavior? So we switch here to a complete implemented example. So here, this is a behavior. Schon mitten nicht? Was ist denn jetzt schon wieder? Thank you. No. So it has switched back to. It has switched back to this. Okay. Such a behavior definition, there you find code like implementation unmanaged. Unmanaged means unmanaged from a framework perspective. So that means that the in an unmanaged case, the developer has to implement the create, update, and delete logic, whereas if the implementation would be managed, the framework would take care of this. Like you know it maybe from BOPF, where you can set transactional processing equals to true, and where the BOPF where a BOPF object would be generated, that would take care about the create, update, and delete. So right now in this ABAP programming model, we have no support yet for the managed use case, but this is planned to be available in an upcoming release. And then we say define behavior for this CDS view. And we can define that a property in the CDS view is used for eTag. We can define that this will be that this instance will take care of the logs that you might want to use, and that it supports create, update, delete. And we have one action which would do something. And in addition, we can specify whether certain fields are read-only, are mandatory, and you will see it from the generated UI how this behaves. The next step is to do an implementation of this behavior. So we just defined that it can do create, update, delete. Now we have to add business logic to it that it can do create, update, delete. We find here underneath our behavior definition, we find a behavior implementation. And first we don't see much, so but it's not empty, this class. So first of all, I can make it a little bit larger. Can you read it there? Is it large enough? Okay. So we will find here certain local classes. So here we have defined an interface. So one class would be a buffer class. If you program everything yourself, you would define a buffer that is used to exchange data between a so-called handler class that is doing some calculation, and finally a saver class that saves the data to the database. So here we have some constants. We have this buffer class, and what else do we have? We have a handler class. This handler class is actually having certain methods, like it has a read method, which is called when, for example, an update is done and you have to check an e-tag. So that's the lock method that would perform a lock on an object. Create, update, delete methods, obviously. And here is a calculate bonus method, which is implemented for doing an action. And what you see here is that the importing parameter is typed. So we have now, this is of the same type of the CDSU which is used. And this is a main difference to the SAP Fiori programming model, which is using BOPF, where the interfaces are not typed. So this has several advantages because we can do better code checks during design time, opposed to finding out that maybe some things do not work only at runtime, which is a little bit late. So here we have then the implementation, and finally you will find a saver class. This is the action which is defined in the end. Finally, a saver class, which is saving the data. Since we are here having our table just locally, the saver class is quite simple. It just inserts data into that table. But in the saver class, you could also, for example, call an RFC or an OData service if you would later on be on premise and your business logic might be implemented on RFCs. So the next step, after having defined and implemented the behavior, you would define the scope of your service. And this is now this new object called service definition. In our project, we find here a service definition. It can be found under business services, and there is a service definition, and basically what you find in a service definition is a list of CDSUs that are part of your OData service. So you expose this, and because you know here this not so nice ABAP names and starting with Z, and you have to follow naming conventions. Fortunately, there is the option to define some nicer aliases so that are more readable, and these will show up as the name of the entity set when being called as an OData service. And we also here have to expose the other CDSUs that we are using, for example, as F4 helps, like currency and unit of measure. And here is a special type of CDSU. It's a custom entity. So what we can also have are so-called custom entities. One moment, I have to navigate. This is a custom entity. And it looks very similar to a CDSU as you see here, but the main difference is that it has an annotation. It means query implemented by. And this allows us to define CDS views that are not reading the data from an underlying table, but the implementation is done via a class. So that means you can tap into existing business logic, so you can call an RFC or an OData service to retrieve the data. So we are going here to our source code, and we find finally a class where you can do this custom query, and it implements an interface, and with just one method, it's a select method, and here you can and here is the code that I'm getting data from a backend system. So I'm defining on the fly, in this case a destination, a service destination. The code is very similar if you would call an RFC service, and here we leverage the destination service, which is part of the Cloud Foundry environment. So this is, for example, an example of the reuse of the cloud infrastructure. So you just have to define a destination, be it an RFC destination or an HTTP destination once in your Cloud Foundry environment, and you can reuse it for different implementations, be it Java, JavaScript, or ABAP. And based on this, if we have this, we are reading data from a backend system, then we have to create the filter, and finally we are performing execute. So that has been now lots of coding, right? Now now this more picturesque part is there. We have a service binding. So we have defined now a service, and we can go now to a service binding. So the service has been defined, and there is a new type of object called service binding. And here we see our CDS or service, here the CDSU bonus calculation. And now the cool thing is I have a preview button here, which will, after I've authenticated, so I have to exp. It starts a Fiori Elements application. So the ABAP developer is able to check the service without having to start Web IDE. So if you want to do real, let's say in quotes, real development with SAP UI5, you have to use the Web IDE still. But here we see already a service. So that this has all been defined via the annotations that it gets green and red based on it. Yeah. So basically, what you see is here that we can have those previews, and it's yeah. You can have some basic tests that your service is really up and running as supposed. So that was this preview. What else can we do? So we can have authority objects. We can leverage so-called DCLs. These are the data access control language, so that you can have authority checks when doing select statements from CDS views. You can define roles so that to manage the access. You can have unit tests for ABAP. Sorry. And if you can have so-called service consumption models, if you import a CDS view, you will now you will have sample code that you can use to easier implement consumption of OData services in ABAP. So Outlook is, so that next steps are that we want to have more authorizations when doing create, update, deletes. So draft handling is something which is also on the roadmap, and sooner on the roadmap is this manage BO. That means that lots of code that you have seen where I do create, update, delete in a table is not that nice. So this you can have generate, because I've started here with a plain table. This code would make more sense would have made more sense if I would have read all the stuff from the backend, and there it will still be used. So these unmanaged scenarios will have their place if classic APIs are called, if it is on premise, maybe in RFC, or even remotely. If you want to do in ABAP into cloud, you want to do an extension to an existing scenario where the data is not read locally. The programming logic, like determinations and validations that you might know from the BOPF programming model, this is still valid. So therefore, if you start, if you are now on older releases, if you want to prepare for this new world, this is something you should look into. This logic that to do your development in a kind of determinations, validations, so that you can make most of it when later reusing it. Any questions? Yeah.
Will it be possible to use these techniques from some on-premise release?
Sorry, can you?
For the on-premise releases, is it available, this technique, from some version of on-premise?
Okay, the question was whether what I've shown here is available on-premise. No, not yet. So it's planned to have a first shipment of the programming model with 1909. And the ABAP in the cloud will be always, let's say, the front runner. So you will have the newest version in here, while on-premise we will have a shipment on a yearly basis. So next will then be with these upcoming S/4HANA release.
I have more questions.
Sure.
The definition and the binding, it looks like currently SOAR manager and definition and binding for SOAP services is just the same for the new things. It's just a definition for outside to be able to consume the service.
The service.
Similar.
Similar to what?
Similar to currently, I need to define if I would like to generate a SOAP service to outside. I need to make a binding. I need to make it in SOAR manager. I define a binding. I define a definition. It's it's the same.
Yeah, here the service binding, let's say one difference is you can bind, or you will be able to bind different protocols. So right now, let's say the first binding which is available is OData version 2. Upcoming is OData version 4, for example. And in principle, one could even foresee if let's say another protocol becomes popular in the future, we would be able to support this there as well. But the biggest difference compared to normal OData development is that you wouldn't have to or for example, compared to a SOAP-based implementation, you have already you could reuse your code by just creating a new binding, whereas you would otherwise have to re-implement your service. Yeah, sure.
What is about sending text messages back, error messages, and so on? Is there standardization for this, or does it mean you need some parameters always which are evaluated?
Again, the question was about error messages, so we can do this here. So these are error messages that you can get back. So this is a bunch of error messages here because I haven't entered any data in here. And if I go into my implementation, that would be my, where is my behavior implementation? Service definition.
You have defined these fields as mandatory fields.
Yeah, I've defined mandatory fields, and I have here my, that would be my, no, I've here some error message. Let me see. Where do I have my error messages? Here's a check, for example, and a check for updates. You have here in the framework so structures like failed components, and that was if something goes wrong, and I had some other checks.
There was a message.
Yeah, where's my, yeah, here, for example, like this one, you insert this then into a structure and you play it back. Basically, you create T100 messages and send it back.
What is on the next to the get text?
Here, but
so it's you implemented manually.
Yeah. Here I have a message class here.
You have your own logging. You have there's no standardization process.
No, you have to, right, because we have here to program everything more or less ourselves. In the managed case, here the framework will take over more. Okay. I guess then we're done. So nobody here to stop the recording.
It wasn't recorded at all.
Now we have to wait. Not sure what Gregor does.
Coffee break, and we all need a cup of coffee. Look at your faces. Recording.